Disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use, tips a balance in favor of fair use. I begin my new life. I hope some of the Scientologists are listening to this. For 9 months, I didn't do anything but stay home, try to make some sense out of what I had been through, and adjust to my new life. 1 week after I left, I started recording my thoughts about what had happened to me in a journal, which I still have. I was very confused. For several months, I saw no one but my parents and felt very much alone. 6 weeks after leaving, I made an attempt in my journal to analyze the group to see if I could figure out what went wrong. I wrote, "There is something very wrong with the way this group is being run. Something very basic that I can't quite put my finger on." At this point, I was not yet willing to hold LRH responsible for the situation, and I didn't know anything about mind control. However, there is one observation that I made that I consider to be an insight that was of great value to me, that there was little or no real caring about people as human beings. People were only seen in terms of their usefulness to the group. Just want to add what I think too. If you guys notice, it reflects society in a lot of ways. Just think of that song by Rihanna. I gotta work, 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 work. Da-da-da-da, work, 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 work. Keeps the economy going, doesn't it? An example I came up with was a young woman from Holland who was being trained as an auditor on FLAG. She was still having difficulty with the English language and, as a result, had trouble understanding the course materials. And later in her attempts to audit people, she was never able to progress beyond the most basic levels as an auditor because of her difficulty with the language. Couldn't they have... I don't agree with any of this, but you're telling me there's no other native speakers from Holland that could have helped her? When she made mistakes, she was sent to ethics and was one of the first to be put on the RPF. It never seemed to occur to anyone that her problem was not evil intentions toward the group, but simply not understanding English well enough. They knew, you guys, they knew. This is what narcissists do. No one cared enough about her to see the obvious. All anyone could see was that she didn't perform well as an auditor and therefore must have evil intentions. So she was disciplined accordingly. If anyone had really cared about her as a person, rather than just a commodity, they would have easily been able to see what her problem was and help her learn English. But that just wasn't the way things worked in the Sea Org. All of them knew that. They didn't care. I began to realize that for the most part, in the Sea Org, there was no real caring. Oh, that goes throughout Scientology. Not everyone. No love. All love was conditional upon job performance. Imagine being a child going through that. And the standards for job performance were often quite ridiculous. There were exceptions, of course. Sometimes true friendships between people did develop, in spite of everything. But that is not how the group as a whole was run. Often, when such real friendships did develop, every attempt was made to separate the people. Yeah, isolation is the name of their game. Such as what happened between Quentin and myself. The real threat to Hubbard was not the possibility of our having sex, but the emotional closeness and true friendship that we had developed. Yeah, and also narcissists are not able to be intimate like that. This separation of true friends has the effect of making the person feel very isolated even though they may be surrounded constantly by hundreds of people in the cult environment. It's a control method. In my opinion, the most effective thing an exit counselor could do in an intervention with a Scientologist is to have a genuinely caring attitude towards the person. Scientologists, especially staff members, are starving for that sort of compassion. Natalie Webster talked a lot about that. Cannot stress this point strongly enough. A compassionate, caring attitude will be much more likely to help the person break free of their mental prison than any information about the group will. Simply giving the person information will not work because it will be dismissed as lies from the WOG press. I know this because I lived in such an environment for over 5 years. The main key to free a person from this cult is compassion. This is true of all cults, but it is especially true of Scientology, where in the upper echelons, there isn't even any pretense of compassion. Like the prestigious executives with no empathy. Showing compassion just might be the key to breaking through the person's cult identity and reaching the real person. Once an emotional bond is established with the person, you can then give them the facts and help them to see their way out of the trap. One friendship the Church of Scientology was never able to destroy was the one between Quentin and myself. We continue to write to one another. In September, I received a letter from him saying that he was having a very rough time. He had been taken off auditing for errors he had committed on a PC who had cancer. Quentin had been desperately trying to help the person, but nothing seemed to be working. He needed medical care. He sounded very depressed. He sent me a picture of himself, saying that it was to remind me of him. I was very concerned that he might try to commit bluicide again, and wrote him back right away. Told him I was concerned that he might be feeling he had to commit bluicide, and if he ever felt that way, he could call me anytime and talk about it. On October 12th, I received my last letter from Quentin. He told me not to worry and that he would never attempt bluicide again. That he would never attempt bluicide again. Things seemed to be looking up for him. He had written up a proposal to his father requesting an indefinite leave of absence so he could go to school and learn how to be a pilot. You know, LRH didn't like that because you know why? LRH wasn't a pilot. You know what they do? They compete with their children. It's sick. I had the feeling that if his proposal was not approved, he would leave Scientology, which would be very difficult for him. He would have to cut himself off from his parents and the only life he had ever known. I was determined to support him in any way I could, if he made such a decision. Once again, I answered his letter right away. This time I received no reply. For the next 8 months, I kept sending letters hoping to get through to him. Thought that maybe his parents had found out he was writing to me and stopped my letters from getting through. Since I had left Scientology, I was considered a suppressive person, and no Scientologist in good standing was allowed to communicate with me. But that hadn't stopped Quentin. It occurred to me that maybe the worst had happened, and Quentin had committed bluicide, but I kept trying to write to him. I had many dreams about Quentin and about Scientology. For a whole year, I had nightmares every night about the group, where I would be running away from Scientologists who were trying to get me to come back. A lot of ex-Scientologists have that same dream. Nightmare. Jenna Miscavige talked about it in one of her videos. I would be running away from Scientologists who were trying to get me to come back. Sometimes I would have dreams about being locked up in prison and escaping. After a year, these dreams became less and less frequent. In June 1977, I received a call from Chuck Ohl, who worked in the Guardian's office. He told me that Quentin had passed away last October. According to the story Chuck told me, Quentin had been found in a coma in his car near the airport in Las Vegas. The story always changes. The cause of his death was listed as unknown, and Mary Sue had ordered a full investigation into his death. Why didn't they want to help him before he died? You know why? It's called cover-up. Cover-up takes a lot more energy than telling the truth. Sound familiar, you guys? Sound familiar? You guys should know what I'm talking about. Mary Sue had ordered a full investigation into his death. Chuck wanted to know if Quentin had called her or tried to contact me. I was stunned. I had felt for a long time that something had happened, but hearing the news really shocked me. I told Chuck that Quentin had written me just before he left and that I would send him copies of the letters and do everything I could to help with the investigation. I felt that his mother had a right to know what happened to her son. I knew that she really loved him. I made copies of the letters and sent them to Chuck. Imagine the mother, she was married to the Antichrist. By the time I heard the sad news, I had started going back to college at the University of Michigan and was well on my way to a new life. I felt badly about Quentin, but I vowed that I would do everything in my power to live my life to the fullest. Since leaving Scientology, I have never taken my freedom for granted. I know how precious it is because I lived for over 5 years without it. Quentin was gone, but I had my whole life ahead of me, which I would live the best I could in honor of both Quentin and myself. Fortunately, I had no trouble in school, probably because I held a fairly high position in Scientology that required me to use my mind and to make decisions even if they were in service of the group. I managed to graduate from the University of Michigan with a 3.7 GPA in the top 10% of my class. In July 1977, I received a call from Karen de la Carriere. Karen de la Carriere, who had been one of my closest friends on Flag. She was on a mission to LA and tried to convince me to come back. She said that the org had moved to a brand new complex and that exciting things were going on. Yeah, sure they were. Gary Epstein, the commanding officer at the time I left, had been removed from his post after having been discovered to be a suppressive person. She said that because Gary had been in charge at the time I left, I was welcome to come back with no penalties, since I couldn't be blamed for leaving when such a suppressive person was in charge. For a few seconds, I was tempted. I didn't tell her yes, but I didn't tell her no either. I said I'd think about it. When I hung up the phone, I realized that I'd never go back. I was starting a new life, and it didn't sound as if things had changed all that much in the Sea Org. About a week later, she called me back, and I told her that I was not going to return. That was the last time I ever heard from anyone in Scientology. You guys can tell this is a long time ago, right? Recently, I spoke with 3 former Scientologists who didn't leave until the early 1980s, all of whom were top Scientology executives. Sus to me. They said that from the late 1970s on, things got much worse in Scientology, especially after Hubbard's messengers took over. Hubbard's messengers took over. They all agreed that I was very lucky to have left when I did. If anyone tries to tell you that the kind of horrendous experiences I went through in Scientology don't happen anymore, don't believe it. There are many people around who can testify that things have gotten even worse. After graduating from the University of Michigan with a BA, I moved to New York in 1980. While in some ways I was functioning well in life, in other ways my experiences in Scientology were still affecting me. Over the years I considered several different careers, but I never followed through on any of them. The career I was most interested in was being a psychotherapist. I went to school for about a year and a half at a psychoanalytic institute, but I didn't complete the program. I had no trouble academically, but just didn't have the motivation necessary to complete the program and found an excuse to drop out. I didn't realize until very recently that my inability to get a new career going, particularly in this field, had very much to do with my experiences in Scientology. Because my success in Scientology resulted in such total devastation for me, I had a deep subconscious fear of ever being successful again. After all, for me, in Scientology, any success I achieved was very temporary and could be wiped out at any time, at the whim of LRH. Success to me meant being wiped out. Now that I realize this, I am able to reprogram my subconscious mind and am finally starting to work things out for myself. I am planning to go back to school for my MSW. I am no longer in a cult and can be as successful as I want without fear of being wiped out. See what they do to people? They devastate your mind. For the first time in years, I am starting to feel like the enthusiastic, ambitious, idealistic young woman I was at the age of 18. This time, however, I know that no one is going to give me the answers to life. I now realize that I have a mind that is fully capable of guiding me through the decisions I make in life, and I will never put anyone or anything above what I know and feel. I now know the techniques that are used to control people's minds, and that people exist in this world. There are people that exist in this world that have no compunction about using these techniques to manipulate people. If I see that a person or group is using these techniques, that is where my association with that person or group ends. You guys know who else does this, right? Manipulative, prestigious executive. My life and my mind are now my own, and I will never give them up again. Update, August 1996. I have since gone back to school and have completed my master's degree in social work, passed my licensing exam, and am now a certified mental health professional. That's awesome. So anyways, you guys, this is the last of the 9 Lives in Scientology. I got another juicy one I'm going to read to you guys later. So I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night wherever you are. Peace.